So last night I went to a special one night only screening of The Lost Boys at my local drive-in, and lately they've been showing a lot of older movies. So as I walked to the bathroom, I looked to the left of me and there was The Goonies playing on one screen and Gremlins playing on the right screen. I thought to myself, this is a special moment. I'm exactly where I should be. So the next day at work, I just kept thinking about the Coreys, their films and their lives, and the impact both things have had on me and so many others. So I decided to make a video explaining why I love the Coreys so much. Let's start at the beginning. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my mom told me that she was going to show me my first scary movie. I don't even know if I knew what the word scary meant, but I was excited, and she showed us The Lost Boys. I remember seeing Keith Sullivan bite into that man's head and Corey Feldman stake Alex Winter's heart and feeling an adrenaline rush through my body. I knew right then that I loved being scared, and I loved scary movies. There was no turning back after that. I remember carrying around the Lost Boys VHS everywhere I went, and I was crushed when it melted in my car on a hot summer day, but I bought a new one. In the next few years, I started to grow up and collect VHSs, chasing that high I got from watching The Lost Boys. In those years, I bought Stand By Me, The Goonies, Friday the 13th Part 4, Gremlins, and Silver Bullet. I loved all these movies, but Stand By Me and Silver Bullet were special to me. Both these movies were written by Stephen King, and both had a Corey in it. I wanted that gas-powered wheelchair from Silver Bullet so bad. I would ask my family to buy me one, but they never had the heart to tell me that it was just for a movie. I actually watched a 35mm print of Silver Bullet in Hollywood a few months ago, and it was such an epic experience. And I instantly knew that Stand By Me was special, and I would just watch that movie on repeat. It's just a perfect movie, especially if you're a kid. Everything about that film is great, but Feldman's performance was epic. He was angry and incredibly funny, but just a complicated character that was really sad. His performance is amazing, not just for a child, but for anyone. Feldman had great comedic timing. You can really see it in Stand By Me and The Goonies. It was obvious from Silver Bullet and Stand By Me that these kids were complete naturals in front of the camera, and they were going to be huge stars. They were the definition of movie stars to me. Within these years, I started to watch a lot of VH1 specials like Behind the Music or biographies on actors and bands, and I saw the Coreys biography. I listened to them tell stories about being in some of the greatest movies of the 1980s when they were just little kids and teenagers, while dating some of the hottest young actresses at the same time, while becoming addicted to cocaine and completely spiraling out of control. I remember in 4th or 5th grade thinking, this is the life I want to live. I want to be a giant movie star who spirals out of control off of drugs. I used to have dreams of being on the set of Lost Boys or driving around in a limo through Hollywood with them doing cocaine. Yes, I actually had those dreams as a kid. I also used to watch the Howard Stern show a lot as a kid, and Corey Feldman was a frequent guest, and Howard was obsessed with Feldman's friendship with one of the greatest comedians ever, Sam Kinison. I love Sam Kinison, but he was one of the biggest cokeheads of all time, so Feldman told all these insane stories of doing cocaine with him, and I loved every single one of them. As a kid, I wasn't allowed to play outside. I could only stay inside, so I would just watch movies and TV. And I just always had a taste for things that children just shouldn't be watching. I watched kids shows and cartoons too, but I loved being scared, and I got a thrill from watching R-rated movies. They were just cooler to me, especially older movies from the 70s and 80s. And a lot of these movies show drugs and the Hollywood partying lifestyle, and I put that shit up on a pedestal, and I wanted it so bad. I also remember in elementary school watching the Tales from the Crypt movie, Bordello of Blood, about a vampire whorehouse, where Corey Feldman turned into a vampire, which I thought was so cool. I love that movie. And I used to watch this kid's horror show called Big Wolf on Campus, and there's an episode where Corey Haim plays himself, and he's making a vampire movie, but it turns out that he's an actual vampire.
Corey Haim was a big star in the 80s, and then... Corey, you want to take it from here?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's not much to add. I mean, one day you're a lost boy, you're talking to town, and, next day you're up here in Pleasantville and you're shooting another vampire movie.
This blew my mind as a kid. I loved it. I still love it. And in middle school, the reality show The Two Coreys came out, and I watched it, but I was too young at the time to really see how drugs had a negative impact on their lives and how sad things became for Corey Haim. I knew that drugs had completely derailed his career, but I didn't know how bad it was on his state of mind and soul. I thought, hey, every movie star went out of control at least for a time in their lives with drugs, but he just took it too far. Then when I became a teenager, I got into more of their movies like Watchers, Lucas, and License to Drive, and I was like, oh my god, these guys are the coolest fucking actors ever. These movies are amazing. I love these movies, and I love the Coreys even more now. Lucas is so heartbreaking but relatable. I think almost every guy can relate to that one girl that just wants to be friends and that feeling of rejection, and Corey Haim portrayed it perfectly in that film. I honestly think that Corey Haim gives one of the greatest child performances ever in that film. It's such a mature and natural performance. It's no wonder why he became such a big star after this. But to truly get into why I love and personally relate to the Coreys, I have to get into my own history and dive into the subjects of psychology, drug abuse, sobriety, relapse, friendship, and tough love. So I saw Lucas in 9th grade. I started smoking weed in the last month of my freshman year, and by that summer I started to take handfuls of pills that were cough medicine that had the active ingredients of cough syrup, so it made you hallucinate and walk like Frankenstein, but it also had amphetamines, which is the key ingredient to crystal meth. So every weekend by the time I was 15 years old, I would take these pills and stay up all night just smoking weed and watching movies. Just like the Coreys, I had a serious drug problem by the time I was 16. I was in a band with older kids, so I was partying hard nonstop. I was taking a lot of ecstasy for a while, drinking till I vomited, always popping pills, and I tried cocaine and meth once or twice when it was around, but my main thing was pills and weed. I was already a problem and my state of mind was severely suffering. In 2018, the Lifetime channel made A Tale of Two Coreys, which is based on Corey Feldman's autobiography and shows the story of the Coreys. I watched this so many times when it came out because I had been waiting for this movie to come out for years, and I think they did a great job. Like I said, it's made for TV, so it's not perfect, but I think the casting was amazing, and there's so many great scenes in that film. There's one scene in particular where Haim comes home after partying all night, and his parents are waiting for him.
California vitamins you're getting from one of your new friends? I mean, what am I looking at here? Huh? What is this?
This scene was my life every weekend in high school. That's incredibly embarrassing and hard to admit, but it's true. I really recommend this film. It showed me so many moments I knew from stories that they had told, and it was just so great to see. And the actors who portrayed them really captured the essence and gave great performances. I made a review on it, but that was before I had a legit microphone, so excuse the audio. After I graduated high school, all I had were drugs, and I became an ugly monster from all the pills. In January of 2016, I tried getting sober, and that lasted 5 months. The first month, I went and lived in a sober living house and went to 3 or 4 NA meetings a day, and I really got to understand the psychology of drug addiction and self-destruction. But I didn't stay sober then. Like I said, I got only 5 months, and then I said fuck it and kept doing drugs until New Year's Eve of 2018 when I decided to get sober again, and I've stayed sober since. As of right now, I have 20 months completely sober. You may be saying to yourself, what the fuck does this have to do with the Coreys? See, when I was a kid, I loved the Coreys because of their great movies. Then when I struggled with sobriety as an adult, I got way more obsessed with their personal lives and drug use. You have to remember that Feldman and Haim, for all their similarities, are completely different people. They both grew up in the Hollywood system and were constantly auditioning for parts. They both got great roles and gave great performances and became giant stars by their preteen years and started drinking and smoking weed, which led to cocaine and pretty much every drug out there by the time they were 16 or 17. I've heard them say that during the filming of License to Drive is when their addiction started to take over. They were giant movie stars, but they were also drug addicts who had been sexually abused by older men, which fueled their drug use to dangerous heights. But let's be honest, they were rich teenagers in the 1980s living in Hollywood. Sexually abused or not, they were going to experiment with drugs, which is normal for teenagers or people in their early 20s. I know that played a huge part of why they took so much, because they were trying to escape the psychological drama it put in their brains and soul, but like I said, almost all teenagers tried drugs for whatever reason. They were young and famous in the 80s. Drugs were part of the lifestyle. But Feldman got lucky and was arrested for a DUI as a teenager for driving under the influence of cocaine and was sent to rehab. This was the best thing that could happen to him. After this, he turned his life around and kept a sober lifestyle. I honestly think that if it wasn't for this arrest, he would be dead. Feldman tried to convince Haim to go into rehab at this time, but Haim was in denial of his drug use and was, at least for that time, dedicated to living a drug-fueled lifestyle. And he did. Haim's life, state of mind, and health just got worse and worse. His appetite for drugs consumed his entire life. For a while, he was able to make some great films while using drugs, but by his early 20s, he was just a complete mess, and it was incredibly obvious that he was out of control, and he went from an A-list movie star to making completely forgettable, cheap, straight-to-video movies just to support his dangerous drug habit. It's insane how this incredibly talented, great-looking, likable star became this ugly shadow of himself. To say it's sad is an understatement. He struggled with sobriety for his entire adult life. He could get a few weeks or a few months sober, but he always kept going back to drugs. For many years, he was looked at as one of the biggest fuck-ups of Hollywood. People would say he had everything: looks, talent, charisma, and he threw it all away for drugs. which is partially true. But until he did his reality show, The Coreys, in 2007, his sexual abuse was off the record. I mean, he told almost everyone he personally knew, which I think is a big reason why his friends put up with so much of his shit and stuck by him for so long, cause they knew he was a great guy who had suffered horrible abuse. As you probably know, he died in 2010 from pneumonia, but there was many bottles of different kinds of pills in his bathroom. Haim was the kind of person who would lie about his sobriety. I've heard many people say that he would claim his sobriety, but it was obvious that he was on something. Whether he was sober or not during the time of his death, or even the fact that he technically died of pneumonia and not an overdose, I think it's safe to say that he died as a result of his drug use. With the amount of drugs he was taking, it's a shock that he didn't die earlier, and that's something I also really relate to. Just like me, he had this dangerous, ugly appetite for any drug that would get him high. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but what I'm trying to get at is knowing the psychology of a drug addict who self-destructs. We always find an excuse or reason to keep using, and there's no way Haim didn't tell himself for years, well, I do drugs because I was sexually abused. If I wasn't abused, I would be okay. And I do believe that is a big reason why he did so much drugs so young, but like I said, he most likely would have tried drugs anyway. Now, I'm not at all trying to diminish what the sexual abuse did to him. I mean, he was sodomized as a child. I can't even begin to imagine what that would do to your life. But as an adult, you need to take account of your own actions and choices, and he chose to keep relapsing and doing drugs. Every day is a new day, and we decide how we're going to live it. This sounds harsh, but he uses sexual abuse as an excuse to do drugs. And that's a pretty good excuse, better than most people, but it's still an excuse. In my opinion, the key to sobriety is honesty. You need to be honest with a user and let them know how dangerous and ugly their drug use is so they can get past the denial and delusion and get honest with themselves. I only bring this up because I know that Corey Feldman gets a lot of hate from people who love Haim. They say he abandoned him when he needed him the most, and he told Haim secrets of abuse after he died to profit off them, and I disagree. Feldman loves Haim. Feldman is one of the best friends anyone could ever ask for, but dealing with his own sobriety, Feldman had to be honest with himself about Haim. He tried so hard for so many years to help Haim, but he kept fucking up and relapsing. And after a certain point, he had to just cut him off out of his life for so many years. There's certain stages in a drug addict's life that no matter what anybody does, they're not going to quit drugs. They're dedicated to their disease. I've been there, but Feldman and Haim had a complicated relationship. Haim loved him and Feldman loved him. They were more than friends. They were brothers. But there were so many years he became so ugly from drugs that he just couldn't even look at him. The problem with Haim was that he didn't want to confront his demons. Sure, he would get so loaded and cry to many people about his sexual abuse, and he knew that he was killing himself with drugs, and he tried several times to stay sober, but the thing about sobriety is that it takes you face to face with your demons, whatever they may be. When you're sober, you can't ignore them, and you have to face them head on. And Haim couldn't face his demons, so he always went back to drugs. There's a couple times during my last years of drug use where I would get sober for a few weeks, but I would always relapse. And when friends would ask me why, I would tell them, I'm too weak. Listen, I love Corey Haim, but he was a weak person and he ruined his incredibly promising life. And I know a lot of that is because of the trauma he suffered as a child, but every addict and adult has to get to a certain point and say whatever happened in my past, whatever anybody did to me, no matter how horrible it was, it's the past. You have to get to that point if you want to get better. Like I said, I don't want to diminish what happened to him at all, but he had every chance to get his life together and he just didn't. He tried and so many others tried to help him, but he just couldn't stay sober and get his shit together. It's a tragedy. Corey Haim was an amazing actor who peaked before he was 20 years old. He could have been known for being one of the greats, but he's like the poster boy for everything not to do as a star. He's the perfect example of a cautionary Hollywood tale. There's no denying that Corey Haim was a truly tortured person who lost to his demons and self-destruction, but there's also no denying that he was a big part of many great films that people still watch today. Film is forever and his performances will always be here to watch. Rest in peace, Corey Haim. To me, the Coreys are the perfect representation of the 1980s. They were in many of the biggest and coolest movies of the decade. They wore bright colors and constantly did cocaine. I think a big reason why their story is so interesting is because they had everything an actor could ask for. They were teenage kings of their times. But even during the brief period when it was the peak of their success in life, there was still an incredible amount of darkness that they hid from everyone. Their story is about fame, drugs, self-destruction, growing up, friendship, the struggle of sobriety, and the darkness of Hollywood.